Hello and welcome to Tracking Trump on DeKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. The last few days have been a whirlwind in Trumpland, from a ban on international students at Harvard University to now a pause in student visa interviews for foreign students from all over the world, which will particularly hit Indian students who are the largest number of international students in America. US embassies around the world have been told to halt these student visa interviews as the Trump administration vets the social media accounts of the applicants. And there is no time limit to this pause. We don't know when this is going to end. Now, Indian students, as I said, form the largest group of international students who study in America. In fact, according to US Embassy data, in 2024, with more than 331,000 students studying in the US, India had surpassed China's numbers for the first time since 2008-2009. Trump's crackdown on foreign students comes at a time when he is at a larger war with elite American universities that he believes are too left-wing and anti-Semitic, which is why he's been going after Harvard University, even though Harvard has been fighting back and has got a temporary stay from the courts on Trump's ban for enrollment in their international programs. Now, many US universities rely on tuition fees from foreign students for a substantial part of their revenue. International students are also part of critical research teams across campuses in America, especially in the field of science. So the long-term impact of Trump's actions could be catastrophic, not just for students and their lives, but also for education and research. In fact, more than 300 student visas have been revoked by the Trump administration in the last few months. And clearly, anyone who does not ideologically align with Trump's views on Israel is being booted out. The whole thing has had a chilling effect on free speech in American campuses as well. Well, joining us on the program today are three terrific voices on this. I'm happy to first welcome Professor Irfan Nuruddin, professor at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Yamini Iyer is with us. It's great to see her in a different role as a senior visiting fellow with Brown University. And also with us, Milind Vaishnav, the director and senior fellow of the South Asia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's joining us today from Geneva. Thank you very much to all of you for being with us. Professor Nuruddin, wanted to ask you first, how are Indian students in particular, or all international students, digesting this news about the halt in visa interviews and the general uncertainty that there must be about their own futures at the moment?
I think panic, Nidhi, is probably the best word, right? I mean, there's such confusion, and this is so unprecedented for many of us. I came as an international student from Bombay, 30 years ago to America, ended up going to graduate school here, making a life over here. That was a path followed by so many of my classmates from India and generations upon generations. And the truth is that as good as it was for international students, it was tremendously good for the United States. As you pointed out in your opener, it was great for American universities, but it's been great for American science and innovation and research. So no one expected this particular war on elite universities, on universities and higher education more generally, and on the blanket group of, let's call them legal immigrants or legal students. I mean, everyone that he's targeting now are here on legal visas, they're on student visas, etc. So there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of panic. And the one dimension that I would also suggest we talk about is that this comes at the same time that he's also cracking down on H-1B visa issuances and on there's now talk about maybe a crackdown on the OPT, the optional practical training. So it's not just, the value proposition of coming to the American university has become less certain, but the possibility of turning that investment into a job, at least for the start of your career in the US, which was part of that value proposition, is now completely uncertain. So tremendous uncertainty, some panic, and yet there seems for many of our students, like there are very few serious alternatives. The American higher education ecosystem remains the best in the world, at least for now. And so for them, I think it's caught between a rock and a hard place.
Can I ask you, I'm sure there are parents and students from India who are probably reaching out to you, all of you maybe, for advice on what to do. I have extended members of my family that are supposed to be going in the fall to start in Ivy League universities and at the moment seem a little stressed out about whether they can actually go. So if you, Professor Nuruddin, you could tell us, I mean, what you're advising them, particularly people who've already got admission, what do they do? Do they go ahead? Do they wait and see? I mean, what are the options for them at the moment?
Well, the options are limited. Look, this pause on the issuance of student visas right now, right, the temporary pause while they consider the vetting of social media is going to be a pause. The uproar in the United States among higher education universities, if they completely say we're not issuing any student visas, would be catastrophic. I mean, so, and it's one thing for Trump to go after Harvard University, the most elite, prestigious university maybe in the world, definitely in the United States, partly on the presumption that there are very few fans of Harvard among the general population, right, for whom it is a representation of an elite university. But across the United States, smaller state universities, public universities, community colleges, technical universities are also dependent, even more so, on the tuition brought in by international students. So I ask those students to stay patient. But I would also tell them, quite frankly, that the America that they're coming to is different than the one that they may have aspired to when they were in eighth and ninth standard, dreaming someday of coming to the States, right? My own family, I've got a young family who are also considering coming to the States. I've told them all, delete your social media, right? Be very conscious about what you put out in the public. That's good advice generally, I would argue, for young people. But in this particular moment, when literally a tweet, a Instagram post, a Facebook post that might be critical of American foreign policy towards Israel could lead to your visa being revoked once you're here, it's simply not worth the risk. So I think
Or
two
even
things. One is
even posts that are critical of Trump. Actually, Yamini Iyer, I in
exactly.
fact have a friend who works with a think tank who actually was in the US last week, and for the first time ever, she was telling me how she had to like completely wipe her phone before landing in the US and ensure that all her social media was deleted. And I just find it astounding that we've come to this point where people are just scared about what an innocuous tweet might mean. I mean, you should actually it's supposed to be the land of the free, etc. But we've come to this point. Did you think that this would ever happen in America, on American campuses, no less?
We've come to this point, Nidhi, but isn't it scarily familiar for so many of us in India? It's like you know what the next page is going to look like. And I think that that's where the comparative is actually where there's a lot that we can learn. Both about this particular moment for the United States, but also where the sites of resilience are, which are quite distinct from what we have experienced in our own home. And to me, I think while there's no question that this is astounding, who would have thought, as you rightly say, that the land of the free will also be one in which all forms of freedoms are going to be clamped down upon so quickly and at such scale, such speed, and in such a destructive way. But there are also sites of resilience. I am finding the fact that universities have found after the first kind of initial shock of the first month or two, some collective voice. That in that collective voice, they are speaking largely to the principles of what a university is meant to stand for: academic freedom, knowledge, ideas that know no boundaries, curiosity. The idea of a university as a genuine global space for ideas and innovation is what a lot of the university communication is bringing to the fore. And most importantly, that even in this moment of chaos, there are the courts, and the courts are quick to act in ways that align with the rule of law. These are assurances that institutions in India don't have. And I think these assurances that offer some sense of hope that in all the chaos and destruction, there is also there are also bulwarks, and one can, at least for the moment, hope bulwarks will remain strong against this assault.
Yeah, and actually the most striking example of that is Ashoka University and what's been happening with the professor who was arrested, and then the subsequent order by the Supreme Court. And that comes into a completely different realm, but I see the comparison straight away there with what's happening. But Yamini, it's also true that while universities like Harvard and later on Columbia managed to find some spine and stand up to this administration, it's also true that even a rich university like Harvard does have its hands tied behind its back beyond a point, because they do depend a lot on grants from the federal government. And now Trump is threatening to withdraw all that money. It amounts to hundreds of millions of dollars from what I understand. So, this could be a very difficult battle for even an elite university like Harvard and a rich university like them.
No doubt, this is a difficult battle, both because of the tools, the coercive tools that the government has, which they are deploying. And you can see step by step, right? So first, even on the student visas, the first step was to take away the privileges that are given to the university through the Department of Authority for issuing student visas. When the courts come in, then this sort of blanket ban. You can see that the state is able to identify the different coercive tools that it has available to it, and deploy them step by step and has newer tools to use each time there is a bottleneck to the broader agenda. Absolutely, and they are doing this without any breaks. But I also do think, again, I'm going to come back to the comparative, but just because I'm sitting and seeing both experiences together, I think that even though there is a huge financial battle to be had, and in even elite universities like Harvard, which are probably the richest in the world, are still deeply dependent on federal grants. They still are the richest in the world. So they have more sites of resilience. And it will require, in the first phase, you're basically battling, but there is beginnings of more, and it'll be necessary for more strategic thinking to reimagine how to use and deploy the resources that they have. Which is something that we in India institutions in India rather, don't necessarily have the privilege of, because the institutions are weaker, the wealth that the institutions have is weaker, and the powers of the state are actually far deeper in ways that, because America has a much larger structure, it has, and much deeper federal structure, it has more bulwarks.
Milind Vaishnav, from a bigger perspective, though, how do you see these policies impacting? Firstly, what we discussed with Professor Nuruddin right in the beginning, the impact on research, for example. International students, Indian students in particular, are such a crucial part of research teams, anything with, scientific in particular. And all of this is, we're looking at short to long-term reverses on that front. And also the uncertainty that students are facing now vis-a-vis American admissions. Do you think this would actually turn Indian students away to perhaps Oxbridge if they're interested in, the top-line universities or other countries?
Thanks, Nidhi. I mean, I think the answer is that it already is. And in fact, even prior to the advent of the Trump administration, we have seen signs that people were giving the United States, looking at it with a bit of hesitation. I mean, if you look at the U.S. share of international students over the past quarter century, it's declined significantly. A lot more people who want to study in the West are going to places like the UK, Canada, Australia, even New Zealand. And so this, I think, touches at a deeper problem, right? If you think about, we're in the habit these days of talking about supply chains, right? Supply chain resilience for pharmaceuticals, for food. There's also a supply chain here for innovation, right? And it starts with attracting the best talent, with trying to, after you've trained them, keep them here, and then put them on a path to citizenship. Every link in that supply chain was already broken before the Trump administration came into power. And what they've done now is to essentially take a sledgehammer and try to destroy the entire thing, right? So this was already a place that I think people were having doubts about. And now I think there's a massive cleavage that's been opened up because of some of these draconian policies.
But do you think, Milind Vaishnav, that American universities, even Harvard, the question that I asked Yamini Iyer as well, will be able to put up a long-term fight, given the kind of financial dependence that they do have, on grants from the federal government? Is this something, as at least what one reads in the American media, is somewhere where the administration has the upper hand in so many ways?
Well, I mean, the fight for Harvard is existential. I don't think that's an exaggeration. Yes, you can point to their endowment, but anyone who knows anything about how universities are run, organized, financed, and managed will tell you that, when you take away grants from the National Science Foundation, from the National Institutes of Health and Cancer Research, and on and on and on, these are covering hugely capital and labor intensive, endeavors, right? That it's just not easy to make up. We had a little glimpse of this during the COVID pandemic, when all of a sudden we didn't see a lot of international students from China in particular. And that created, a financial crisis essentially for every major university in the United States. And so, this is of that level. Can you imagine a place like the Harvard Kennedy School, the Harvard Business School, right? Even Harvard College without international students? It's very, very hard to see, unless they completely reinvent themselves, how they could survive if the administration manages to keep the pressure on and the courts don't manage to fully reverse this decision.
A quick last round of questions. Irfan Nuruddin, what is the impact all of this is actually having on campuses in terms of what we've seen here also, which is self-censorship? When you have this kind of crackdown on people who are voicing their opinions about what is happening in the Middle East, or any political issue, then do you see that self-censorship now, where people are just either deleting social media posts or just not saying anything anymore? Protests are not being organized, and it's all gone really quiet. Is that what's happening?
Well, university campuses have their own calendar, right? So we're in the middle of summer, or summer's just started. Graduation's good all over the country. So the next few months are going to be quiet on university campuses, but not for those reasons. As Yamini put it, I think very well, American universities do remain a site of genuine resilience. And I think to not lose track of is that Trump has had a terrible month in the courts. Adam Bonica, a political scientist at Harvard, in fact, just recently posted an estimate that Trump has lost 96% of the cases that have been adjudicated in the month of May alone, right? Equally by Republican appointed and democratically appointed judges, 96%. So there's a lot of attention obviously paid to the initial stuff, and then he loses in courts. Now, he'll keep ramping it up. But the point is that victories are victories, and it means that each time you win, more people get emboldened to fight back. Columbia just had its graduation, right? They booed the president. Alumni assembled and burnt their diplomas. This was just a week and a half ago, right? So the protests are still occurring. But what you are seeing, I think, is that international students, right, are recognizing that their ability to participate in the protests that their American-born, American citizen friends are doing is much more limited than I have thought, right? When I was an undergraduate in America, I didn't think of there being a difference between me and my American friends in terms of, protesting something or the other. When I was in graduate school after 9/11 and there was the war in Iraq, illegally prosecuted because of fake evidence and all of that by Bush and Cheney, I was out in the streets protesting, not thinking about any of that kind of stuff. My international students on campus at Georgetown now have to be much more savvy about those sorts of concerns, because they know that all of a sudden one bad moment could lead to sort of the end of the career path that they put themselves on. But the American counterparts are continuing to fight the fight. But I think the real question is that, we're stuck with Trump for another 3.5 years. And so how do you fight the long haul as opposed to worrying about the short term only? I think the one thing I will say, Milan and I agree on pretty much everything. I think Harvard is a unique unicorn in this entire space, and partly the reason Trump has gone after them is to show that if I can do this to Harvard, I can do it to any university in the country. But Harvard is unlike any other university in the country because it is a unique unicorn. It's got $50 billion in endowment. It's got an alumni network that is vast and influential. Half of the Supreme Court went to Harvard, right? The other half went to Yale, effectively, right? So half of Congress has kids who are at Harvard or who've got degrees from Harvard. So in the long run, the destruction of Harvard completely is not the goal. It is about humbling Harvard. It is about humiliating them. And the question is whether or not Harvard's going to bend the knee. So far, they're showing a really strong spine. And I think they expect that they're going to win in court. The question is then, what does Trump do after that?
Final thoughts, Yamini Iyer, on that. In fact, what Irfan Nuruddin was talking about, the impact on international students and their ability to express themselves more freely. I mean, there was also an advisory, I think, that came out this week where international students were told basically attend your classes or your visa could be revoked, which is sort of like it reminds you of school in a very bad kind of way. But American campuses have been the heart of revolutions, of movements, of protests, of different opinions, and it's so unlike what we saw when we were growing up.
No, absolutely. I mean, as Irfan said, strategically, there are going to be questions that international students are going to ask themselves to reorient themselves, and that is the consequence of governments when they use the powers that they have and deploy them in such a destructive way. But I also think that there's a larger kind of question that we all need to engage with, which is in so many ways, the elite university was really representative of the kind of end of history globalization moment. These emerged, these have always been civilization. MIT and IIT Kanpur's relationship dates back to the 1950s and 60s, and the exchange of knowledge. So much of India, frankly, Ambedkar went to Columbia, Nehru, Gandhi have, Savarkar, all our founding fathers and mothers had knowledge exchanges and ideas exchanges from being in sites of universities across the world, and that's what the universities. But post globalization, the spread of and the kind of ways in which ideas and people kind of started moving and exchanging through the university kind of really became that site for it. In this moment of deglobalization, which really frames the politics that the Trump moment is, what is the university? How does the university respond to this process? And what does it mean for global ideas and global responses? I mean, so many of the protest movements in the United States may well be on global issues, some of which are initiated by United States governments, but have huge impact on countries around the world. And the universities were these hubs that allowed for this. Where is this going to emerge if it closes down, if these sites don't exist? Which other part of the world can emerge as a space for that? Certainly, sadly, not India. I would like to say that there is a lot of talk in India now about the points that Indian universities may, the opportunities rather, that Indian leverage with the kind of uncertainties in the United States. But heck, we need to look at our own backyard before we say that, because if you're going to be jailed on the back of a social media, a very verbose professorial writing, then who's going to leave here to come there? This is the moment for the world to
there's a
think
special investigation team that's looking into that post, which is another story.
Yes,
Police
exactly.
officers are trying to decode it. And I think someone wrote a very good blog about that, Gautam Bhatia, who said that, well, if you need an SIT to look at that post, it means it wasn't very well written, and I don't know who he's influenced. But that's another story. Milind Vaishnav, last word to you. Honest to God, if an Indian student reached out to you today and said, should I apply to an American university to come and study there, what would you tell them?
I'm with Irfan in this. I think the answer is still yes. I think the opportunities that he or she would have still remain unparalleled. I think the experience that he or she could have could be transformational. But as Irfan said earlier, I think you need to come not with blinders on, but with very clear sense that you are operating in a more constrained environment. And frankly, the prospects of you staying on in the United States for gainful employment and then perhaps transitioning to H-1B or a green card or eventually citizenship, at least for the next several years, that corridor is going to be narrowing, right? So I think I still am betting on the system to be resilient enough, to use Yamini's phrase, to bounce back. But it's not the kind of easy, two thumbs up that I would have given without thinking, just 6 months or a year ago.
Absolutely, and that's a great note to end on. Wish you all the very best, especially to Yamini Iyer and to Irfan Nuruddin, who are right in the thick of things at the moment. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us on that important story. Thank you. And that's it on Tracking Trump this week. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.